All right, folks, this is going to be my last video about House of Chains. If you don't want any spoilers, I recommend clicking off the video now. What I will tell you is that the book was amazing and I really enjoyed it. The ending is particularly good in my mind. But yeah, if you don't want spoilers, don't watch because I want to talk about the details of the book. All right, now that they're gone, I am going to get into it. Let's start off with my overall thoughts of the book, which was one, I just really enjoyed it. I thought this book was great. I've heard multiple times that Memories of Ice is supposed to be like the peak or one of the peaks of the Malazan series. So I wasn't too sure going to House of Chains, like, is this going to feel like a drastic step down in quality or am I not going to be enjoying it as much for one reason or another? I didn't have that feeling at all. If anything, this was a nice change of pace. And I've seen some comments on the other House of Chains videos where some people alluded to the fact that Erikson made a conscious effort to change things up in House of Chains and to not include all of these massive battles and sieges and focus in a little bit more on character progression. And that's definitely the sense that I got going through the entire book. I enjoyed being back with characters we hadn't seen in for an entire book. I felt like we got more information about the 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏. It kind of felt like in Memories of Ice, there was this big finale with the 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏 and the ritual and, them being released by 𝒂𝒊𝒏. In some ways, I was like, oh, is that kind of a wrap up to 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏's story? But it seems like, no, that was just the ending of one 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏 chapter. And in House of Chains through Onrack, I feel like you get a whole nother look. And it does turn out, it seems like there's this whole other group of 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏s that are unbound by the ritual or have found a way to escape the ritual in one way or another. And I think that opens up some really interesting possibilities for the story moving forward. So just curious to see how that nets out. The funny thing is I've already talked about this book to you guys for probably a total of 40 or 50 minutes. So I'm going to try not to ramble too long in this particular video, but I know that's just going to be the case. So I think it's time to just jump into the notes that I have and, I'll just chat about what I was thinking as I was finishing up this last section of the book. So I enjoyed the way that the book wrapped up with 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒏 and Onrack. In some ways, these characters are very, very similar. They have different backstories, obviously, but it almost feels like their trauma or they're both conflicted by the fact that they've been exiled from their respective groups, like 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒏 is exiled from the Tiste Eater, and Onrack is exiled from the 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏. I think it's fitting in that sense that they end up together, and Onrack kind of commits himself to 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒏 to be his protector. It seems like there's a lot of interesting moments with the two of them. Particularly, I thought it was interesting when they initially escape the flooded warren and they end up in what I believe is a warren of shadow or a warren of darkness, maybe I think it is. Yeah, I think I'm more confident that it's a warren of darkness because what we have light, shadow, and darkness now. That's what it seems like. And they end up in this warren of darkness, and that's where they see the Daregoth, the Hounds of Shadow, for the first time. And I believe Onrack gets totally mauled by one of them. And I think that's the first moment where we get to see, like, oh, the Hounds of Shadow, rather the Hounds of Darkness. I'm sure I'm going to keep mixing those two up, but the Hounds of Darkness are like super badass and way more powerful than even these Hounds of Shadow that we've seen previously. So that was kind of like that was a really interesting moment as we were following these two characters. But I think for me, the most interesting moment is just the finale of the book where it's the two of them and all of these children of Shadow. I don't know really how to describe them, but they're Cotillion's little army that he's created. And they're all protecting the first throne, which is the throne of the 𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒂𝒏. But really the most important part that I'm trying to get to is just this little conversation that kind of happens between 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒏 and Onrack as they're sitting there about to defend the throne. And they're talking about Trull's origin story, essentially, of how he came to be. And he alludes to it multiple times throughout the book that he's got this kind of very traumatic story that he hasn't really told to anybody. It feels like to me, I can't remember exactly what was said, but Onrack is like trying to comfort him in some ways and empathize with his position. And 𝒊𝒏𝒂𝒏𝒏 has kind of like, I think he's realized he's comfortable admitting this story to Onrack. especially now that he knows more about Onrack's origin story, which is super interesting as well. We never actually get to see the results of the story. Like, I think it's almost pretty much as soon as the story's about to begin, House of Chains ends. And so I've actually started to read Midnight Tides, and I assume nobody's going to get mad at me here, but it starts off, Midnight Tides like jumps right into Trull Sengir's background. So I'm assuming that's just going to be, I haven't gotten that far at all, but I'm assuming we're going to now see his story through his eyes. And then at some point we'll like zoom back out to the present time. Yeah, I just thought it was a really nice like cliffhanger to leave the book on, and definitely made me like, all right, so one, we know the throne of shadow, or the first throne of the Talanamas is about to be assaulted, but at the same time, we're going to get this really impactful story from Trull Sengir. And I don't really know on what level this story will be. Will it be just like a small personal story, or will it be a story that has a greater effect to the world in one way or another? And knowing Erikson, it probably will. So yeah, super pumped about that. Onrack, I guess we could touch on Onrack while we're here. I was going to hold it off, but Onrack, I thought this was one of the craziest reveals. Throughout the book, we're slowly getting more information about Onrack and his lover that he betrayed when they were still flesh and bone. In some ways, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. Like, I was like, oh, I mean, you know, it is a big deal, obviously, to betray somebody you're committed to. But, you know, it just seems like a standard, human story of a man cheating on a woman, or vice versa. People move on from that kind of thing. But like everything in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, your word has a lot of impact. You know, your word has repercussions as well. And I think that's one thing that Erikson is trying to get at, is like just tying this back to like our own personal lives. Sometimes we make commitments to things, and it's very easy to go back on a commitment sometimes and to feel like, yeah, I told that person I was going to do that thing, or yeah, I was, you know, going to stick by this person, but you know, this and this happened. You know, you can make excuses, or you can come up with like, it's very easy to argue with yourself into a position where you don't feel guilty. But I think the older you get, the more you realize that it is very important that you stick to your word, and it can have ramifications that you won't see the results of for a very long time. And I thought that that's kind of what Erikson was getting at here. And it turns out that, you know, the woman that Onrack cheated on is 𝒐𝒊𝒂𝒏, or the goddess, the whirlwind goddess, rather. It's not 𝒐𝒊𝒂𝒏, it's the whirlwind goddess. And I just thought that was, oh, what a great way to tie the book back around, is, you know, to bring that in. You know, it happens like really in the moment. You don't really, it's not this like big lead up. I mean, I guess there was a big lead up throughout the whole book, but the way that Erikson fits it into the ending of the book, it was just such a like, oh, the bow just tied so nicely over that storyline. And then you've kind of, it's like the rage of the whirlwind is this woman's rage, right? About being betrayed. I don't know. What a metaphor. So anyway, let's move forward, because there's a lot of other things to talk about, but I thought that was super cool. Okay, so let's talk about Fist Gamut for a second, because I really enjoyed where his storyline went at the end of the book. So about halfway through the book, or 3/4 of the way through the book, I was really annoyed with his character. And honestly, I couldn't stand reading him anymore, because it just felt like so much whining and self-pity and, oh my God, I don't want to be here. I'm such a bad leader. Oh, nobody wants to listen to me. I'm causing issues for the soldiers, da da da. But really, he's just like, his mental state is what's causing issues. It's not himself. I felt like he had the ability to take leadership and to be the general that he should have been, but it was his constant self-sabotaging that was making things worse for himself. And it's what, I think that's what eventually led to him getting injured and hurt, was just this constant, you know, pity party that he had created for himself. And so I was really like, I don't know, at a certain point, I was just over it. I was like, okay, there's other characters I want to read about. I don't really care about this guy who's doesn't want to step up to the challenge. And, you know, if I want to zoom out and, you know, dial back on why he's feeling that way, I get it. Like, this guy had basically been in retirement and had thought his life at war was over. And then through his connection with Adjunct Tavor, as Tavor got older, he was just kind of like wrapped up in this new war. So on the one hand, I get why he felt that way. But on the other hand, it's like, dude, you're here on another continent and you're the general of this army, like, I don't really think you have a choice at this point. Like, I would prefer it if you would just suck it up and be, useful. But maybe that was a little bit too much of me to be asking. But anyway, the ending where he dies, it seems like he dies in his sleep, but then his spirit is wrapped up in the arrival of the ghosts of the desert of Uraku. And somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it essentially Raraku, somebody's going to correct my pronunciation because you guys keep doing it. And I don't mind you guys correcting it, but I know it will be corrected. Anyway, the desert has a spirit itself, and the desert basically brings back all these ghosts from a previous generation to fight the whirlwind goddess. And it happens at night, the night before there's supposed to be this massive battle between 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔's army and the 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔's army. And at first you're not sure what's going on because 𝒂𝒊𝒏 just seems to wake up in the middle of the night, and if I remember correctly, he hears like people getting ready for battle and soldiers marshaling, and I think he hears, just the sounds of war starting to brew. And he kind of like quickly gets dressed and runs out of his tent. He had this terrible pain which suddenly vanishes. And so you kind of get the sense immediately, okay, this is there's something going on and it's important, but maybe what 𝒂𝒊𝒏 is seeing isn't quite the truth. He gets on his horse, and I believe he joins like a legion or some group of soldiers. I don't know how to describe it. And they go off and they charge into the 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔's army. But, the 𒂂𝒏𝒌𝒔's army is completely caught unawares, not ready at all for this attack. And they essentially just get slaughtered. Like this army of ghosts just slaughters thousands of soldiers. That's what it sounds like. And the whole time 𝒂𝒊𝒏 is like, it just kind of seems like he's riding an adrenaline rush. That's, as you're reading his point of view, it just feels like he's, feeding off the energy of this assault. But the next day, after 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 finishes the battle, you find out that 𝒂𝒊𝒏 died in his sleep. And so I found it a fitting end to this character who I kind of hated after a certain period of time, or really disliked reading about, that at the end of the book, he kind of like, he gets liberated in a sense. Like he doesn't have to fight these wars anymore. He's no longer bound to the service of 𝒂𝒊𝒏 and the empire. How do I say this? He gets to rebuild his reputation by leading this assault on all these soldiers. And it's not like anybody else is really going to know that he was a part of this or had a part in this ghostly assault. But I think for his spirit, that was important, right? Like he gets to die heroically, even if he did die in his sleep. And I just thought, yeah, another beautiful metaphor by Erikson. And it made, in some ways, the fact that I disliked this character so much really made the ending more satisfying because of that. I have so many notes. I'm trying to figure out what is the next thing I want to talk about. So I think let's get this over with now. And that'll be the final battle scene between 𝒂𝒊𝒏 and 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔. I guess a good preface to this final bit is there's this moment where 𝒂𝒊𝒏 goes to visit 𝒂𝒏𝒄𝒄𝒄's tent in the camp a couple days before the final battle. And 𝒂𝒏𝒄𝒄 is now this destriant of Treach, the god of war, and has created this like little isolated temple within the camp where nobody can seem to breach inside the temple. It's only 𝒂𝒏𝒄𝒄 has control over what goes inside of the temple. And he brings 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 inside, but when 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 enters the temple, which is really just a tent, Felison returns. And it's Felison without the influence of the whirlwind goddess. And I think it becomes very obvious all of a sudden that Felison's personality has been totally changed and clouded by the whirlwind goddess, and that there's still like a little girl buried away underneath, and that little girl's personality has just been slowly eroded over time by this other creature who I think it's almost like in Deadhouse Gates and the beginning of this book, it feels like maybe the whirlwind goddess is a good being or has good intentions or is coming from a place of trying to help. But as you get to the end of House of Chains, you realize, no, that's not really the case. This is really just like a selfish endeavor, it feels like. And it's really just an attempt to create chaos in order to get what the goddess wants. And so anyway, in this moment in the tent, you get to see Felison again and see that innocence that we had been seeing in Dead House Gates. And that was kind of heartbreaking at that moment, because there's a moment where you go, oh, maybe she will get out of this. Like maybe she'll escape. Maybe she'll find a way to shake off the goddess at some point. So when you get to the final bit where Shaik is walking out onto the battlefield and still controlled by the whirlwind goddess, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. 𝒂💏 like walks out to meet Shaik on the battlefield. There's this inner conflict going on where the whirlwind goddess is trying to just like erase Felison from the body. That's what I correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I got out of that, is that the whirlwind goddess is like making a final push to claim this body for her own, so that she can use what seems to be a full power that might have been restricted because Felison still had some aspect of control. As she's getting closer and closer to doing that, but ends up getting stopped. It had something to do with Osric, Loric, and the crippled god. If I remember correctly, somebody from the House of Chains or the crippled god chains up this 𝒊𝒏𝒏 spirit that is the whirlwind goddess, and basically, puts her away. I should have taken better notes on that part. But the 𝒊𝒏𝒏 spirit is killed or stopped for the moment. The power disappears, and Felison's body is left without the whirlwind goddess. And she kind of like, there's this moment where you feel like, oh, Felison's free. But then she gets run through by 𝒂💏💏💏's sword, and you go, oh, fuck. And what makes that just even more sad is Felison describes how all she wanted all her life was to, find a way to bond with her sister. It's kind of like one of these stories as old as time, I feel like, where as a younger sibling, you're always trying to connect with your older sibling, or, trying to be as cool as them or fit in with them, find ways to hang out with them. I think that's much harder than it seems. Like on the outside, that seems like a very easy problem to solve. But as kids, there's, you don't know what you want and you don't know how to describe it. So it's very hard to fix these like ethereal problems, like trying to hang out with an older sibling who doesn't want to hang out with you. And anyway, as Felison's being killed, if I remember correctly, she remembers that feeling. It's just really depressing. I don't think Tavor even knows that it happened. Like we know that Lestara, Yil, and Pearl know what happened, but they hide it from her. They don't tell 𝒂💏💏 that she killed her sister. But 𝒂💏💏 must know that was much easier fight than she was expecting. There's no way that she's not suspecting that something else was afoot. But yeah, what a terribly depressing and sad way to end the book. Like I do feel like that was the main tension throughout the whole book, was this battle between sisters, or like this sister rivalry that was going on. It was depressing, but it was satisfying. Like I was like, okay, I mean, we knew this was going to be a tragic story from the beginning. That's what I was feeling, and it's definitely where it ended up. So I'm curious to see how later on in the books, how 𝒂💏💏's character changes once she finds out that she killed her sister. Because I imagine there must be that a moment of revealing that information to her at some point, or a moment where she reveals that she knows that she did that. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. And we also, I think another interesting thing to think about is, how is this going to affect Paran? I mean, he's master of the deck of dragons now, and he's had these two powerful sisters that he probably doesn't even really know about what's going on between them. And he's going to have, this information will be revealed to him at some point, and I can only imagine it's going to have a negative effect on them. But him being master of the deck, Felison does seem very dead to me. Like, I don't have this feeling that she ascended, or that there was some like other force here that saved her. But I don't know. If he's the master of the deck, you never know what's going to happen. Maybe she does come back around. Like this particular house of people seems to keep coming back. Crazy that this whole story between the sisters was just fantastic in House of Chains. Really enjoyed it. In the second half of the book, the High Mage Loric becomes a focal point. We get to learn a lot more information about him. We learn that he's a Tisti Leosin, So that was an interesting reveal because we knew he was some sort of mysterious character. We didn't have that much information or didn't know where his power came from, but 𝒂💏 kept trying to figure this out. And, you know, there was this allusion to the fact that he was super powerful. Boom, we find out he's a 𝒔𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 Leosin, and he's also the son of 𝑺𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒂𝒍, who is a god, who is the father of light, I think. Anyway, I have this note here that I thought, like, when I was figuring all this stuff out, I'm just going to read this note because I thought it was a little funny. High Mage Loric is of the 𝒔𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 Leosin. His father is 𝒂𝒐𝒄𝒊𝒏, the god, ? Of this warren of fire and light, Loric is searching for his father 𝒂𝒐𝒄 and finds him in a warren that's not really a warren. It's a memory of another time. There he finds hounds of darkness, the Ares, demons, and the 𝒂💐 I don't know what the fuck is going on there. And that's where I left it. But I think that's a good summary for that whole section of the book. Like, okay, we have warrens, houses, and now we find out that, like, memories can also have a place in time that you can then travel to. Because I do remember it being very explicit that the place that Loric travels off to find his father is not a warren, it's a memory. That was, if I remember, that was very explicit in the book. But it seems like a warren. You know, it didn't differ. The vibe was that of a warren. And then he goes there and we see all of these ancient beings who we've heard about before, but they all seem collected in this memory. And then at the edges of the memory, in these snowy mountains, they find demons that they can just go, oh, you need another familiar? Let's find another demon for you to partner up with. So it's like the demons are... It kind of reminds me of Warhammer 40K in a way, where it's like when you get to the edge of space or you dip into the warp, that's where the chaos is, the demons. And that's what it felt like, where you get to the edge of the memory or the warren, and that's where beings who are like they're not even bound to one god or one warren. They're just kind of ethereal and they probably drift from place to place. And that's where you can find these other beings. It seemed like that moment was more of just like revealing more powerful characters and more of the key players who will have a larger role in the future. It was definitely a moment of confusion, but it's clear that 𝒂𝒐𝒄 is going to have a large part alongside Animander Rake and the other guy who we meet at the beginning of Midnight Tides. I forget his name because I don't know him that well. So let's talk about Karsa and Apsalar and where they ended up. So they have kind of an ambiguous ending in the book. After they go to defend the Throne of Shadow, they go on another little journey and end up back at 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒏𝒆𝒍's tower in the desert. And they kind of, you know, they're waiting for instructions basically at this point. They kind of finished their job with 𝒂𝒐 defending the Throne of Shadow, and they're like, all right, essentially it's kind of like, all right, boss, we're going to sit around and wait until you have more instructions for us. And then, I don't know, the most impactful thing that I remember from this storyline is Crocus becomes Cutter. In a way, he does this so that he can get closer to Apsalar. But what he seems to have done is pushed Apsalar away by doing that. I don't want to read too far into this, but it does seem to be reminiscent of, I don't know, just romantic relationships in general. It's like there needs to be a certain degree of polarity. And the fact that he changed himself to be so similar to Apsalar in some ways maybe pushed her away or made her not. I'm not saying that she's not interested. This isn't totally the correct metaphor, because it's not that Apsalar doesn't love Cutter or is not interested in Cutter or whatever. I don't think, like, in this book, like, I don't get, you know, this isn't a very sexual relationship. This is a loving relationship. It's a caring relationship. We don't even get, you know, maybe they've had a physical relationship, maybe they haven't. There's no, up until this point, there's been no description of that. But I don't really think that's what this is about. It's just more about the connection between these two characters. And Cutter really cares for Apsalar. But it seems like she can't return that in the same way that he's looking for. And she knows that. But that's not to say that she doesn't care for him too. It's very confusing. And as they're sitting and waiting at 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒆𝒍's tower, 𝒂𝒐 comes to Apsalar alone. And they have this like brief conversation. But anyway, this essentially what this conversation was about is just like Apsalar knows she still has jobs to do for 𝒂𝒐 or has a role to play in the future of Shadow. But I think she doesn't want to do it Crocus or Cutter. I think she feels like held back in some sort of way. And I also think that she doesn't want Cutter to get hurt. That's what I'm getting, is like, this is like a caring thing. She doesn't want to be a part. She's so close to him that the thought of him getting hurt is really troubling to her. And I think that's kind of what she asked Cotillion at the end, is like, hey, whatever happens next, I think we need to separate. And so Apsalar goes on her own way. We don't know exactly what she was assigned yet or what her next job is, but she goes somewhere else. And then that leaves Cutter to kind of like absorb the fact that he's been abandoned by Apsalar. And it's just a super sad, innocent feeling. Like, it's the feeling of getting crushed by the first person you love. And it was very depressing to read, but it was so real at the same time, like very easy to connect with Cutter's feelings in that moment. You know, the way that it finally wraps up is Cutter is then assigned to protect Føllesen the Younger, or this new Føllesen character, 𝒂💏, and the prostitute from Shaiq's camp. Her name is slipping my memory at the moment, but Cotillion basically says, hey, these are going to be important people coming up. I need you to protect them. And that's what his job will be moving forward. So we know he's still going to have a role to play in the coming books, which is good because I like both of these characters so much. One quick side tangent here before I get to Karsa is the Tano song that we were experiencing throughout the book. I believe it's reached its conclusion, but I'm not entirely sure what happened. I know it was affecting Fiddler. I know it was affecting Kalam as they got deeper and deeper into the desert. I think it had a lot to do with the ghosts of the desert coming back to life. And I also know it has something to do with the Bridgeburners ascending, which we kind of got a confirmation about at the end of the book, that, hey, Bridgeburners aren't gone. They've just moved on to another role or another place currently. And there seemed to be some sort of confirmation about that in the final moments of the book. But I gotta be honest, this is one of the places where I'm feeling like I've got a little bit of a gap here. I feel like I have good theories for the rest of the book, but I don't really know what happened here. So I don't want to ask for people to solve this because I want to develop my thoughts on this as I go along. But like, I guess one thing I could ask is, should I know what happened by the end of this book? Should I go back and read the last 100 pages again, or like do some more thinking about this? I guess where I'm currently at is, in some way, the Bridgeburners were blessed by this Tano song, by the Tano spirit walker. They had to leave the desert as a part of this ritual or whatever. But as it's described, the Tano spirit walkers work in, these songs work in circles. So in order for the ritual to be complete, the Bridgeburners had to come back to the desert. And Fiddler and Kalam coming back is what completed the circle, which then finalized the Bridgeburners' ascension. That's where I'm at. And something about the Spirit Walker is allowing them to ascend. How's that understanding? Let me know. I think I'm going to finish up the video with where I started in House of Chains, and that is the character Karsa. What a badass character. This character is fucking awesome. I know he does some terrible things at the beginning of the book, and it's incredibly gruesome and horrific, but the arc of the character is just like, he does some of the most terrible things, but he also gets some of the sweetest revenge in the whole book. Like his revenge on Bidethal. I'm not going to describe exactly what he does because it's gruesome, but oh my God, when that like little half page that happens in the book where Erikson describes Karsa finally getting his hands on Bidethal, I was like, let's go, dude. It was just finally, after so much awful shit going on the entire book, finally you get the retribution that you've been looking for, and it was just so sweet and enjoyable. He also has this moment where he challenges to Daragoth, and now it's becoming a little bit more obvious why Akarium and him have a bit of an even fight earlier in the book, because the Daragoth are described as, again, incredibly powerful beings, and they're a level up from the Hounds of Shadow, apparently. And Karsa manages to kill both of them and like then cuts their heads off and drags them behind his horse. Like, that is such a sick visual. I mean, it's gruesome, but it's also incredible. And now he's got this sword that is a flint blade of the Talanamas. The whole way this character has come together is just crazy. And the fact that he is also a knight of the House of Chains, but is not going to listen to Cripple God and is just like disregarding anything that the Cripple God wants to happen. Love it. It was interesting because he, like, in some ways you wouldn't think that he had to leave the camp. Like, he didn't originally, when he left the camp, it was like, oh, I'm gonna go get a horse and then I'm gonna meet up with Leoman out on the battlefield and we're gonna attack Adjunct Tvor's army as it gets closer to the camp, and we'll, that'll be, we'll use our guerrilla warfare tactics, whatever. But that never happens. Like, it's almost like he never even makes an effort to go meet up with Leoman. He just goes straight back to camp after he goes on this journey. And I think, again, the journey is a metaphor for this evolution that the character goes through. It's like, as he's out on his own, he goes through these other experiences, some of them where he's like meeting with these older Jagut characters, or Jaghut characters. I think somebody put that in the comments somewhere. Jaghut characters, and he learns more about the world. He learns more about his origin, and he realizes that he's just had all these like forces imposed on him his whole life. He's deciding, hey, I don't really want to listen to anybody, and I don't want to be told what's right and wrong anymore. I want to make that decision myself, and I am going to do so, regardless of whoever thinks they have control over me. I know he's going to have a massive role to play in the books to come, and I'm just super excited to see where his story goes, because really, probably favorite character of the book for sure was Karsa. Just an incredibly well written character and journey that we went on with him. But with that said, I'm going to stop the video here. I have so many more notes I didn't even address, but I've already recorded for over an hour, I think, or almost an hour. I'm going to leave it here, and if I think of anything else that's super important, maybe I'll drop another video or post or something regarding that. I'm super thankful for everybody who's been interacting with the Malazan videos. Holy shit, you guys are fanatical, and I love it. Definitely the Malazan videos are getting the most views on the channel. It's just super encouraging to get comments from people who enjoy what I have to say or like connecting to what I have to say about the books. It makes this whole process a lot more interesting, and I feel like I'm getting a lot more out of the books because I'm trying to force myself, or not force myself, but trying to think hard about my thoughts on these books as I move forward. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there and say I really appreciate those of you who make it to the end of the video and drop a comment, because it gives me encouragement to keep moving forward with this stuff. With that said, if you liked the video, drop a like down below. Maybe subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and I will see you in the next video.